I feel like this is a really challenging conversation for people to have. And I don't think people talk about it because I think it's very taboo. So I'm very curious to see what this video is going to be like.
Every once in a while, a blog post or a book gets written indicating that there are parents out there who feel like they made the worst decision of their lives by deciding to have children. And recently, there was this insanely good piece in The Guardian where a reporter by the name of Stephanie Marsh spoke to a number of different people who openly and transparently talk about how they regret having kids.
I think that takes a lot of guts for a parent to say, I regret having kids. I think they're allowed to be truthful about how they truly feel. But I can understand why they wouldn't want to do that because I feel like they'd probably get some serious backlash. Welcome back to Wife Without Kids. I'm Hannah. This channel is all about creating a supportive and non-judgmental community for people like you who have made the choice to not have any children.
Some people, of course, push back on this notion and criticize and ridicule them. Others, on the other hand, feel a sense of relief because they're going through the same thing and they thought they were alone.
The decision to have a child is such a huge decision that when you say that, it makes it sound like you don't care about your child. But I don't think it's necessarily like that, because sometimes I think people find themselves in situations where they've had children and maybe they didn't realize they actually had an option to not have children.
So there's this one woman named Victoria Elder who actually responded to a question on this website called Quora. And the question was, what's it like to regret having children? She responded with the following answer. I planned my pregnancy and I thought I desperately wanted a baby, desperate enough that I married the first man who was interested in having a child with me, knowing in the back of my mind that I was making a bad decision, but thinking I was strong enough to do this. The day her daughter was born, the exact moment the tiny baby was placed in her arms, she said, I still feel like I made a mistake.
That would be really hard to live with. Knowing that you have this little baby and you made a mistake and you didn't want a baby? Oh yeah, I have no idea what that would be like.
That's heavy.
Yeah, so she didn't hide her name in the post and she was just openly talking about what she went through. And of course she got hate. Some people told her to commit to psychotherapy. Others said, take it from a child of an anxious, self-centered, narcissistic psychopath mother. Your daughter may seem unaffected by your bad choices, but trust me, she's been affected.
And I think that's one reason why parents who do regret having kids don't come out and say that they regret having kids, because they get criticized so harshly. It's like people who choose not to have kids get criticized so harshly for it. And so a lot of people stay silent about it. But I don't know, like I think that's her truth. Her truth is, you know what? I didn't make a good decision and I'm owning up to that decision. I don't know. I think you got to give the lady some credit for that.
So people, of course, criticized her quite a bit.
So at some point that kid's going to grow up and read that. So that's a little problematic. I wish she'd hidden her name. But I mean, I like the guts of being able to say things that people are going to criticize and to spark conversation, because it's such a forbidden topic. Like that you're a monster if you say it, but a lot of people are thinking it, and we should have an open discussion about it so people make the right decisions.
I can understand how, yes, if she didn't hide her name and her kid reads it one day, I mean, that's going to be pretty rough because the kid's going to probably feel all sorts of horrible about that. So I guess, yes, that is a bit problematic.
Which doesn't mean don't have kids. It means some people will love kids. I love my kids. I think it's the greatest decision I made. And some people not so much, and you should be aware of all the consequences and make the right decision for you.
And I like to weigh the pros and cons of everything before I commit, right? And so you can make decisions in your life and then correct the course if you feel like you're going in the wrong direction. But once you have a kid, you have a kid. You can't change that.
And that's one reason I think it's actually really important to talk about children as a choice instead of an obligation. Because if people don't realize that they have a choice, or there's so much social pressure to have kids that people think, well, that's just what everybody's doing. But there are groups of people who aren't having kids, and that's okay. I really think this is an important dialogue.
So that's a responsibility and a commitment that you have to deal with for the rest of your life. And I really appreciate people who kind of break the mold and share the truth about this romanticized image of having kids.
I agree with that, because I do think it's very romanticized. The positives of having kids are pushed so hard, and then the negatives are just like, oh, well, yeah, those exist, but look at everything you're getting over here. That sometimes I think people who do have that doubt think, okay, well, it's just going to be so good. Maybe the challenges won't be as big as I think they'll be, and there'll be so many good things that even though I have that doubt, I don't really want kids, all of the good stuff will so make up for it. And I think maybe that can be true for some people, but if you really don't want kids and then you end up having them, could be a possibility that the things you find challenging actually outweigh the good, especially if you don't really want to be a parent.
So, by the way, Victoria Elder's daughter is actually 18 years old now, and the reporter...
So she just read it now.
No, well, the reporter at The Guardian spoke to her, and I think her daughter pretty much understands what her mom means. Her mom loves her a lot, and it has nothing to do with the daughter. It has everything to do with how much a mother's life or a parent's life has changed, because you give up and sacrifice a lot just so you can take care of this kid.
It sounds like she had some sort of conversation with her daughter to kind of fill her daughter in on that, and that's obviously really important for her daughter to understand that the mom still loves her. I'm really glad that they included the part that, you know, they said, okay, well, they did have a conversation with the daughter, so the daughter's not just finding this out online.
There's a Facebook group that's called I Regret Having Children. This page is here to let all the mothers and fathers know that regretting having kids is not abnormal and shouldn't be a taboo subject.
I had no idea that a Facebook group like that existed. There are probably Facebook groups for pretty much everything nowadays.
This group is not keeping it 100. It's keeping it 1,000.
They are. So the group has about 5,800 followers. They talk of parenting plus depression, debt, extreme stress. It is of not being able to relate to your children.
Several years ago, I had a lady that I knew quite well tell me that she actually regretted having her son. Not because she didn't love her son. She said she loved her son, but she actually said she felt like she never totally connected with him. She didn't really want kids, and then she ended up getting pregnant, so she's like, well, I'm going to keep my child, and I'm going to be a mom and do the best that I can. But she said to me, like, this child was now an adult. He was in his 20s when she was telling me this, and she said she just never felt bonded the way that other parents would talk about feeling bonded with their kids. And she always felt like there was something wrong with her, like, why don't I feel that bond that everyone talks about that you should feel? And so she said, you know what, I actually don't think I was that great of a mom, and I don't dislike my child, but she's like, I just don't feel bonded and connected.
Some folks feel like monsters if they can't immediately fall madly in love with their kids the minute they're born. For people who it doesn't happen to, which is a lot of people, they're like, wait, is there something wrong with me? Am I a monster?
I think this feeling that he's talking about is really similar to people who choose to be child-free, because the majority of people in the world are having kids, and there is a lot of societal pressure to have kids. So when you don't feel like you want to be a parent and you don't feel that desire to have a kid, you start questioning yourself and you think, is there something wrong with me? Like, why isn't my biological clock ticking? Why don't I have the desire to have a baby and to be a parent? And I think those are really real questions that people should be able to ask and talk about. I'm glad there's a place that parents can go to have those discussions, because if you just hide it and you pretend it doesn't exist, then I think you feel really alone. And I don't think people should feel alone in the world. There should always be someone that you feel like you can connect with.
And so sometimes that happens when the kid's born, sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's never. And it doesn't make you a monster, just that's who you are, and that's okay.
And also, there are so many factors at play. Obviously, postpartum depression has a lot to do with whether or not a mother can bond with the child. I mean, they're depressed, and that happens to a lot of women, so that's normal. There's also the issue of not realizing ahead of time that you are going to sacrifice a lot.
I can see that, and I think that there's a lot of pressure to be a certain type of mom, especially with social media now, because you see all these other moms doing things, you know, being like the most amazing mom, and then what if you're not the most amazing mom, and then you look at yourself and you're like, well, I'm like failing at it. I'm well into my years of being a child-free adult, and there are so many things that I'm just used to now. The quiet in my home, if I want to get up and go somewhere, I can. There's a lot of flexibility. I can kind of eat whenever I want. The longer you have that flexibility, the harder it would be to change. When you have a child, your life changes in so many ways, and I feel like that's probably very overwhelming for moms and dads.
Here is a father's post that I think is fascinating.
Oh good, I was hoping they would do like a dad post, because lots of moms write in, but it's always interesting to see when a dad writes in and says something too.
I have an almost 5-year-old girl. She is amazing. I spent her first 4 years regretting having her. Wow. Seeing all my single friends or married friends without children made me jealous. It's like I died and lost my previous life. I entered a new life with much less joy. I do wish people would talk more about it openly.
I think it's hard sometimes for people to be real about stuff like this. It's hard for people to be real about why they want to be child-free. And it's hard for parents to be real about saying, hey, yeah, you know what? This didn't really pan out the way that I thought it would, or it changed so much of my life and I wasn't ready. Transitions and change seem to be hard for a lot of people, and I think that's normal. Having a kid is going to be a huge transition and a huge change to life, and it might take some people a lot longer to adjust to that than other people. Okay. Totally got a hair in my mouth.
I believe most parents suffer, but they stay quiet with a fake smile.
So you do have to keep it real. Even if you love your kids, and don't regret it for 1 second, it's still a giant responsibility. Your life is definitely different than it used to be. I mean, you got to take care of a whole nother human being. Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
They can't take care of themselves for a long time. But let's keep it real. The moms are burdened with that so much more.
It's interesting that they're talking about this and bringing this up, the difference between the man and the woman raising the kid, because someone actually just brought this comment up recently on one of my videos. They said, you know, it's a lot easier for men because most men are the ones that, you know, they'll be around when the baby's born and then they go back to work. And so then their regular kind of 9 to 5 workday part of their life doesn't change. What changes is when they come home and then now they have a baby. But then for the mom, they often will give up their career or put their career on the back burner for a while they're taking care of their kid. And then that changes everything because their 9 to 5 is now not going off to work, but it's taking care of the baby. And it's more than 9 to 5. It's basically constantly. And so the change to a mom's life is so much greater than the change to a dad's life. There are exceptions to the rule, but the majority of the time it is the mom that does most of the raising of the child. And so I can see how that can get somebody down because that's such a huge change to life.
There was a woman who didn't really want to have kids. She was 38. She had a husband or has a husband that she loves deeply, and her husband wanted to have a kid. And she's like, okay, he wants to have a child and I love him, so I'll make it work. Fine, we'll have one baby. And they had agreed ahead of time that they would split the parenting 50-50. And she's like, oh, so naive.
Totally
because
naive.
because her friends had warned her ahead of time, no matter what, no matter how hard you try, things tend to fall back into traditional gender roles inside the household.
That's a really interesting point because I can actually only think of 2 males that I know that were stay-at-home dads. And all the rest of the people that I know that have had children, it has always fallen to the mom to be at home and have like the traditional mom role. And that's just, like she said, it just sort of seems to go back to those traditional gender roles for whatever reason.
And that's essentially what happened to her. Also, I want to read a quote that she also gave about why she hates parenting so much. I'd never failed at anything before. I traveled to 180 countries. I'd almost died of dehydration in a jungle in Madagascar. I'd been on a sailing boat in the Indian Ocean that had been attacked by pirates.
Okay, this lady's had like some crazy life. Wow. That's a lot of stuff. She should write a book about just her adventures before motherhood because that actually sounds like a pretty interesting life.
What happened over the next few years, I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. I felt like I was in a plot in a crime book where the woman is being suffocated by motherhood.
Having gone through all of those experiences and then finding motherhood being suffocated by motherhood, that's interesting. It doesn't sound like that she really wanted to be a mother.
These people are keeping it too real.
Hold on, one final quote. The reality of motherhood is incontinence, boredom, weight gain, saggy breasts, depression, the end of romance, lack of sleep, dumbing down, career downturn, loss of sex drive, poverty, exhaustion, and lack of fulfillment.
There's a lot of sacrifice that parents make to have kids, and I guess these are some of those sacrifices that you make. So it is imperative that you want kids, that the desire to be a parent, I feel, needs to be really, really strong. I think that's the scary thing. If you really, really don't want a child, some of these things could just put you over the edge. So that's why I think child-free is a really viable option for people who are like, you know what, I just don't think I want kids. Maybe I'm just not prepared to go through everything that it takes to raise a child and have my life change that much. And I think that's fine.
That is such an important perspective to share. Because people like me need to know. Like, this is the other side, okay?
There are pros and cons to every decision we make in life, and I think there are pros and cons to having children. And if we only show the glamorous and the good side of being a parent, I don't think that's giving all the information, and I don't think that's fair. I think maybe if society presented, here's motherhood, here's what it looks like, here are the great parts of it, and here are the struggling and difficult parts of it. I think that's more of a realistic picture than having this romanticized feeling about what being a parent is actually like. You might actually have less people choosing to have children if they saw the entire picture and the entire picture was actually presented. I'm certainly not against people having kids. I think if people want to have kids, they should definitely have kids. I think it's about keeping it real.
That connection to another human being and a feeling that if you're lucky enough to experience it, is truly unlike any other feeling you've ever felt.
And obviously because I'm never going to have kids, I don't know what exactly it is that he's talking about, and I don't know what that feeling is that I won't have because I'm choosing not to have children.
The best argument my wife ever made was, hey, because I was unsure about whether we should have kids. She said, you want to experience all of life and you care deeply about it. And that's part of the reason why you're concerned about having kids. Part of experiencing life is experiencing having a kid. And if you've never lived that, have you really lived life? And it was such a great point, and she was absolutely right. And I've loved it.
And I guess if you're on the fence, thinking like that could put you one way or the other. But for me, life isn't just about having kids. If I don't have kids, okay, I will have not experienced this part of life, but I've experienced so many other things. And there'll be things that I've experienced because of the fact that I haven't had children.
But having said that, there is a price, man. There is a price. And women, you got to be realistic about it, because so I would come home and I'd change on the weekends. I might change like 4 diapers in a row, and I'm going around like, I'm like, yes! Look at me, what a great dad I am. She's like, I just changed 40 diapers in a row.
I feel like that's such a guy thing, being like, oh my goodness, I changed 4 diapers. And the mom's like, I've changed like 4,000 diapers this month.
You'll feel like a champion, but society will also look at you as a champion. Whereas for women, it's more about like ridiculing them or criticizing them if they're not doing a perfect job raising their kids. So there's also that double standard, right? There's a lot of judgment toward the mom and a lot of like applause and congratulations toward the dad.
Yeah, the bar is set so low for dads.
Yeah.
Like, as long as you're there and you're not a maniac, and every once in a while you chip in, everybody's like, pat on the back, big guy. Way to be. It is a totally different standard.
I understand if he's at work full time, he can't be doing as much as the mom, but it's like he gets an award for doing just like the tiniest little things that the mom does literally all the time. Which, yeah, that seems like a pretty big double standard.
Just make an informed decision. I have friends who have kids who the greatest decision they've ever made, and I have friends who never had kids and they're ecstatic. So it depends on what floats your boat, but at least know all the information.
This was interesting for me to watch from a child-free perspective. The video was a little bit different maybe than I thought it was going to be, but I do think this is one reason we have to keep the conversation going about child-free, and that is actually an option. I'm not trying to like have a parenting camp on one side and a child-free camp on the other side and trying to like pull people into our camp. It's not about that. I think it's just about being honest and open about what the options actually are. And yeah, you can choose to be a parent, but you can also choose to be child-free, and that's a totally viable option. I recently did a reaction video on an 85-year-old widow that didn't have kids. If you haven't watched it, you're gonna wanna check it out. It was super interesting, and it's right over here.